Hello, and welcome back to Movie Remake Time, a Filmmaker's Compass podcast. I'm CP, this is my awesome co-host D-Man, and in this episode, we are going to take a look at two movies and ask the very simple question, who's done it better? Remakes, sequels, reboots, which is the best? And this week, we're going to compare X-Men The Last Stand from 2006 to X-Men Dark Phoenix from 2019. D-Man. I know you're psyched because this is X-Men.
I mean, what's interesting is, first of all, yes, we're getting into comic book movies now, so that excites me. But second of all, it's weird because Dark Phoenix is, in essence, a reboot of the Dark Phoenix storyline that The Last Stand had, but it is still all canon. So it's not like, quote unquote, a total remake, compared to, maybe like a soft reboot, another shot at the same storyline in a, kind of like a different timeline. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how they approach it. And one of the things, I think we have to address right off the top, and I know this is your favorite thing, but when you compare the two casts, the cast from the original X-Men was outstanding.
Oh my gosh, dude. It's like one of the best comic book movie casts ever.
Yeah. They hit everybody right. Like you and I were talking earlier, Hugh Jackman in the role of Wolverine, who is actually absent from, I believe, he's not in Dark Phoenix, is he?
I think that's the only X-Men movie he's not in.
Yeah, as like a main timeline movie or a main X-Men movie or whatever, because there's a bunch of those side ones like Deadpool and Logan and all that. Mm-hmm. Well, of course he's in Logan.
He's actually in Logan.
Yeah. But what's really fascinating is that original cast from Jean Grey, Cyclops, Wolverine, Professor X, Magneto was so well done that, we were talking earlier about Wolverine and Hugh Jackman. And if you watch him in other movies, he's actually not the character Wolverine. I think we take that for granted. A lot of times we just, assume an actor is pretty similar to the character they're playing, especially in this case, because he's played this character so many times. But if you hear Hugh Jackman in interviews, if you hear him talk or see him in other roles, I mean, he is playing the shit out of Wolverine, and it's amazing.
Well, I mean, considering that he's like, in 2 or 3 other musicals as a leading man singing and dancing, like not Wolverine at all. Yet this is the role that we think of Hugh Jackman as. He was born to play it, and he freaking owns it. It's amazing.
Yeah, so I think one of the major strengths for Last Stand is that it's a continuation of that story with the main cast from the first trilogy of X-Men movies. Mm-hmm. And that cast was amazing. And I have to, kind of tip my cap. I liked that a lot. And if we're talking about the cast, I want to get your opinion here. I think Jean Grey is better in The Last Stand. I like the casting there better than the one in Dark Phoenix or the newer version. She's so young in this one. And I don't know, there's something about the character. I have never quite come to really like that character in the new version.
I'm with you. I think Famke Janssen does a better job anyway, but I think that having Jean Grey as a more older, mature character, and especially for her arc, being kind of one of the leaders of the X-Men.
Yeah.
And then watching her descent into this state that is the Dark Phoenix, I think it kind of is a little bit more compelling for an audience.
Yeah. I mean, she's the, crux of each story, right? Last Stand and Dark Phoenix. And I don't know, there's just something about the vulnerability of Famke, is it Janssen? Mm-hmm. She brings such a vulnerability to the character. Even when you go back to like X-Men 1, when she's kind of still trying to figure out her powers and this and that, there's just a quality there that I think is better. So I don't know. One of the things that did suck about Last Stand, though, was that they wrote out Cyclops. I felt like, as far as the cast goes, he ended up leaving to go join like Superman Returns or something, and he ended up just dropping out of the project basically. So they wrote like 2 scenes for him, one where he talks to Wolverine and one when he goes and finds Jean Grey. But ultimately, like, I think they saw The Last Stand, even in the title, The Last Stand, strikes me as they saw it as kind of the end of this trilogy that they had started. And instead of recasting the character of Cyclops and giving Cyclops a bigger role in the film, they just decided to keep the casting and write him out. But I thought that was kind of to the movie's detriment. I think obviously a big part of Jean Grey's, character arc and relationships is with Cyclops. And even though they use it to devastating effect because the other characters come to realize that Jean Grey killed Cyclops, I don't know. I think the story might have been a little bit better had he been there to the end.
I agree. You can tell that this was, they were seeing this as the end of the road. That was probably a decision to kill off Charles Xavier, Cyclops, Jean Grey. Mystique loses her powers, as does technically Magneto in the movie. It was kind of, you knew at that point Fox wasn't sure what they were going to do with the franchise.
I mean, there's not a lot left with the original cast at that point. Almost everybody, Jean Grey's gone, Cyclops is gone, Xavier's gone. People lost their powers. Other people are bailing.
And I think one of the problems for so many X-Men fans, right? Like Rogue loses her powers in the movies too.
Yeah.
And I think as an X-Men fan, it left such a bad taste in our mouth because that wasn't the note we wanted to leave X-Men on, which is why I think all X-Men fans adore Days of Future Past because we get to see that amazing cast again.
For a split second, but
Fox
it gave you the ending.
That whole terrible kind of Last Stand taste that we had in our mouth.
Yeah, and I mean, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Days of Future Past, I would go watch that. That's probably the best one in the entire series. And it's where the cast from Dark Phoenix and the original cast of X-Men collide in like a time travel, amazing film. But looking at these, I think, I always liked Magneto. I will say something else along the casting for the original or the original cast with Last Stand was I did not like the Juggernaut in the movie.
Okay.
I felt him to be cartoonish. I didn't like that they gave the role to that guy and they didn't do anything with it. I was looking forward to that character and I was looking forward to him in that role. And they really just kind of had him run through a couple walls and that was it.
Yeah. A little bit of fan service to the internet video from the early 2000s. That was,
he says, what does he say? He's like, I'm the Juggernaut, bitch. And that was a great video. I mean, as far as internet videos go, there's a lot worse out there and it was funny at the time. But I also think, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of nods like that in canon films. I think a line like that would actually work better in like a Deadpool film where he's very meta and he's breaking fourth walls and he has a relationship with the audience that's slightly different. I don't like the cheap jokes like that. Like I wasn't a fan of in the second X-Men when they're in the car and Wolverine turns on the radio and it's like in sync. Bye or something. I don't know. To me, that feels like a cheap laugh.
Fair enough. So
I don't like cheap laughs. I don't know.
The cast of The Last Stand is superior, I think, in a lot of ways. The cast of the newer X-Men of the sequel series is not bad. I think something we have to talk about here, because I think this is a very interesting discussion when we're comparing films, is who did it better? The original Charles Xavier and Magneto and that chemistry, or the Michael Fassbender version?
It's weird. Because the original two, they have it's actually shocking when you go back and look at the dynamic. The dynamic as written is actually really similar. They talk about the same things. They have the same worldview. So the characters themselves haven't changed a whole lot. Although obviously when you get back to like First Class and when the new cast is introduced, they're, in a different point in their lives.
Younger.
But I will say, I really did love the chemistry in the newer version.
Okay.
I think as far as close to the comics, the original cast got it correct. It got it better. I liked their ages, but as far as the chemistry, I think the two in with, like First Class, Days of Future Past, Apocalypse, and Dark Phoenix was better.
Interesting.
But that's the problem, is like only for a few scenes do we even see Professor X and Magneto in the same scene in Dark Phoenix. Mm-hmm. It's to the film's detriment, I think. If you have great chemistry between two actors and two characters, they should be together.
Yeah.
Like in Days of Future Past, there's a couple really great scenes where they're on the airplane and they're playing chess and they get really upset at each other because they're very angry at each other. And there's another great scene, which I think exemplifies Magneto as a villain in Days of Future Past, where they're going to, save Mystique so they can't get her blood. Mm-hmm. And you have the dichotomy between the two characters where Magneto holds up a gun and points it at her. And Charles is like, what are you doing? Like, we're going to get her out of here. He's like, no, it's way easier if we just kill her. Mm-hmm. And that's a villain, she's in the way, we kill her. And he's like, whoa, no, we're not going to kill her. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not how we do things. We're not villains. And then Charles realizes, he's standing with a villain.
Yeah.
And I could not get over that they did not put those two together more in Dark Phoenix.
Yeah, I would agree.
They barely only talk like when they're at the outside of that whatever building or wherever, trying to get to Jean Grey, where they're fighting through the bus.
And then they have the scene at the end in the cafe, but you're right. I mean, there's not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like, they're technically in the same location, but they're not having that dialogue, that chemistry that makes it so great.
Yeah.
And that bummed me out because they're like my favorite part, other than Wolverine, but he's gone. So that's another thing, cast-wise. I mean, Dark Phoenix doesn't have Wolverine. And I know we mentioned that at the top, but again, to its detriment. I mean, I think a lot of people associate X-Men with Wolverine, and I know they're trying to get rid of that association a little bit, trying to distance themselves from really Hugh Jackman and Wolverine because they want the franchise to continue on without having to have him there. Mm-hmm. But I think the film still suffers without him. I think he's better.
Well, and especially since he's been such a staple of the X-Men movies that it did feel odd not having him in it. Even for an appearance, which in like First Class, he appears momentarily, and some of those other.
Yeah, what does he say? He's like, "Go fuck yourself" or something.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think that's definitely a problem.
So I wasn't necessarily a huge fan either of the, what's her name, Chastain, the blonde girl in Dark Phoenix. Mm-hmm. She's a really talented actress, and they kind of had her be, I guess, like emotionless.
Well, and there's not a lot of motive with the villain. We don't really understand. I mean, they everything's kind of just line drop backstory, purpose, but it's not as compelling as when you look at the plot of Days of Future. The plot of Last Stand, where the villain is Magneto again. The villain is the U.S. government forcing this cure upon people. There's a little bit much more of a complicated issue going on, especially given, I found it to be very relevant in a world now where we're discussing vaccines and mandatory vaccines. I could see the film in a different light than I did, 15 years ago.
Well, let's move into the story a little bit then. And so first of all, I want to say upon rewatching it, which I haven't watched it in a while, I actually didn't hate Last Stand as much as I remember. Like, I remember walking out of the theater and not liking it. But when I watched it and I was like, there's a lot of problems with it. There's some weird cuts, corny dialogue. Like I said, there's a couple cheap jokes and things like that. But I did still enjoy the film. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the stories then, in Last Stand, essentially the government has found a cure for mutants. And when the plot begins, it's a voluntary option for mutants to go take a shot, and they will, I guess, just become regular humans. Mm-hmm. So, but Magneto, obviously, and there's a large contingent of mutants, hate this because they don't believe there's anything wrong with them. And instead of just voluntarily saying, we're not going to do it, Magneto wants to go weaponize the cure and take out anyone who's not with the cause.
Yeah.
Right. And essentially that's the plot. And then Charles and the X-Men are basically on it's kind of like a chase, I guess, to find Jean Grey, who was presumed dead at the end of X-Men United. And she ends up unlocking her hidden powers. And, I guess she's just kind of evil. I'm not sure why that would make her evil. Do you know?
Well, it's because her
bad writing.
I think one of the faults of The Last Stand is the origins of the Phoenix Force, right? In The Last Stand, she's always had it within her. It's her, her powers that are within the id outside of what Charles the framework Charles set in her mind. Whereas in Dark Phoenix, it comes from space as Dark Phoenix Force actually does.
Yeah. So in Dark Phoenix, then the plot is essentially the X-Men are, tasked by the President of the United States to go rescue a space mission that has encountered a solar flare and they can't return to Earth. So the X-Men go up there. And of course, Jean Grey encounters the Phoenix Force and it, takes over her body and she ends up having, all these, crazy explosions of rage, I guess. And they have to stop her. And that's essentially what the story is. So, what's weird is you would have to admit, I think, that in Dark Phoenix, it's definitely closer to the comic material. Yeah.
It is. I do know that Last Stand is kind of a hybrid of the Phoenix Saga, and I don't remember the name of it. It was a series of books actually that Joss Whedon wrote. It was his storyline with Gifted about the cure. So okay. They're kind of mashing up two different storylines in The Last Stand.
I mean, it's weird because when you look at the Phoenix Force storyline in the comics, that is almost universally revered as, one of the greatest, at least X-Men storylines, but even comic storylines. Mm-hmm. And I've read it. It's, much more epic in scale than we got in either of these films. I feel like the writers were trying to reduce it down to something to do with Jean instead of having this actual cosmic force. Mm-hmm. And, in the first one, they do it with, and both of them really with Charles being in her head and building these constructs and different things. But in Dark Phoenix, they're messing around with her origin story, having killed her mom and her dad's still out there. So they're trying to give her, a little bit of drama, but to varying degrees of success. Honestly, if I'm being, straightforward, I didn't think either movie really nailed the story.
I think that's a fair assessment. They both leave you as an audience wanting more. And what's even weirder is there's story beats in both that are so similar, right?
Yeah.
Mystique is written out of the movie about a third of the way through both films. Jean Grey dies at the end of both films, right? We're dealing with very similar elements. And I think that was a detriment, especially with Dark Phoenix. This is a totally new opportunity to kind of revisit this storyline that they missed the mark on the first time. And they didn't exactly deliver as they could have.
Can I say, though, I really did enjoy when Mystique gets shot by the cure and she ends up reverting back to a human form and Magneto just tosses her to the side.
I mean, but that's so Magneto, right?
Yeah. I loved it in the sense that I'm he's like, you saved me. And then he's like, it means nothing because you're one of them now. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's badass. Cause that's a true villain. You're no longer useful to me. So leave.
No,
not welcome here.
I think one of the other things, in defense of Dark Phoenix, one of the things that I really love is for so many of the X-Men movies, I feel like we witness these characters talking about their powers and getting ready to fight. And I feel like it never happens. And I think one of the things that Dark Phoenix does really well is they give us two really significant fight sequences where we're watching mutants fight one another. Yeah. And I think they're done really well. They look good and they're a lot of fun.
I have to agree with you there. I think in Dark Phoenix, they by far have the better fight sequences. And I don't mean necessarily from an emotional standpoint, but it's kind of like, the fight scene in Captain America Civil War at the airport. Like, they were actually really good, choreographed, mutants using their powers. They were well done.
Yeah.
And fun. That's fun.
And when we're watching X-Men, that's something we want. We want to see people using their abilities. And that's one of the knocks that I think you could give it the series,
especially early on. Like, I remember in X-Men United, like Colossus, like he like metals up, and then like Wolverine's like, no, get the kids out of here. And then he just like metals down and leaves. And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Right.
Why would you tease us with that?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, or they would have like just glimpses, like somebody might like walk through a wall at the school, but you're like, I don't care how old that kid is. He might be useful on this mission. Bring him.
No, you're absolutely right. I think the other thing that Dark Phoenix does really well is I think the space shuttle scene is one of the best sequences in all of X-Men, in the sense that we don't actually see the X-Men act very heroic in most of the X-Men films. Most of the time, their situations are purely like mutant on mutant, right? The X-Men are trying to stop Magneto. And this is an opportunity where we actually see them in that more superhero role of saving a bunch of astronauts. And I think it's very cool. And again, it's an opportunity. As we watch this unfold, we realize that only the X-Men could achieve this. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and I actually really enjoyed early on in the film. They were setting up a dynamic that never really pays off per se. I liked the idea of all of this superhero-ness going to Charles's head.
Yeah.
I liked that because it made him different for once.
Mm-hmm.
So, or really the second time. So the other time he was different was Days of Future Past. But in every other iteration, he's Charles Xavier, the wise,
calm.
Calm guy that everybody can go to. And in a lot of the movies, he is kind of that character where like they find ways to sideline him because he's powerful.
Yeah.
So, they just like, oh, he's been captured, or like he's having a headache or something, like whatever it is, they try to like remove him so that I think is it the first one? They like poison Cerebro.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're always doing things to like sideline him. But I actually liked the idea of like letting this kind of fame and notoriety of the X-Men go to his head.
Mm-hmm.
And they start it and then it never goes anywhere. Like,
well, and I think one of the things we have to admit here is my understanding is when we dive into the backstory of Dark Phoenix a bit, Jennifer Lawrence, I guess, was over being in the X-Men movies.
Okay.
So apparently they were pretty much given the ultimatum to write her out.
She got Cyclops.
Or she wasn't showing up. So I think probably there's a little bit of almost what the original draft of the film was, the first version, which is probably some of that early stuff. And the final draft, which is dealing with Jean Grey, the death of Mystique, all these things.
Yeah, and the death of Mystique, while they do use it to powerful effect, especially when it comes to the character of Beast, which was weird because I thought Charles would be the most affected, but he kind of wasn't.
Yeah, right.
It was kind of like he like spoke at her funeral and he's like, she lives on through me and us. But he's kind of like, I don't know, shit happens. I was like, damn, thought you guys were like super close.
Yeah, right.
But whatever. I like that it has an effect on Beast where we question where his loyalties are a little bit. He's like kind of teaming up with Magneto. That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's always neat to see, characters who are normally bona fide on this side, kind of change their allegiance. Yeah. But again, they end up in the same place. I think the movie may have been more powerful had they given Beast maybe more choices or something that would alter his character trajectory or his relationships with the other characters. And I feel like that's ultimately where this movie kind of falls short, is they all just end up on the train at the end and everybody's kind of in the same place. They didn't change a whole lot.
Well, And the problem is none of these characters who have an opportunity to change, Magneto, Beast, they are brought to the train by force.
That's what I mean.
Well, they're a little bit like, okay, I guess we're going to have to stick and fight. Like, it's not as powerful as if the X-Men were on the train and then Magneto's crew shows up to lend a hand and defend Jean Grey.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really loved, again, and it's probably why it's the best movie in the X-Men franchise, is Days of Future Past. They constantly give characters choices, and they're very powerful moments within the film. And that, that makes the movie, I think. And Dark Phoenix would have benefited, you know me. And I don't know if the people on the podcast know this, but I don't like it when characters are essentially like mind controlled. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because they don't have the autonomy over their own choices. So essentially you end up with just a poor villain like Apocalypse, who's like, oh, I'm just evil, which, let's face it, we haven't even really mentioned Apocalypse except by name, but that villain is awful.
Well, that movie is by far the worst X-Men movie. By far. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I wish Oscar Isaacs, had better material to work with there, and that movie had been better. But, so like you have the Phoenix Force, and it just kind of takes, and this happens in both movies, Last Stand and Dark Phoenix. It just kind of like takes over, and she just becomes like evil. Mm-hmm. Since when? Why wouldn't the Phoenix Force, like, why isn't it like good? Why wouldn't it like make her do like good deeds all day? Why does it turn her evil? What?
Because power corrupts. Come on, D-Man.
Yeah, but people got to want something, or like, I don't know. And I'm not a huge fan of this idea that like people just like are mind controlled. Because even Jean Grey, like, she comes back in Last Stand, and like, I don't know, she's like kissing Cyclops, and then like she just changes into like some like half, I don't know, undead looking, woman. And I'm like, what the hell? And she's not making choices, not making powerful choices on behalf of Jean Grey because of things that happened to her. It's just the Phoenix Force.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's stupid. Like, I don't like that. And that they end up repeating the same mistakes here, where they end up, they have that scene where like Charles is trying to get through to Jean Grey about like her childhood and her memories. And he's like, no, come on, Jean, you can choose. But you're like, not really. Like, choices shouldn't be like forced through or obvious, right? Mm-hmm. You want characters to not want to have to make them. Mm-hmm. But they do so because of some sort of, creed or mission. They have to.
Yeah.
And they have to, the characters have to, not because the story demands it. And it should change things. And I don't know, that's why, like, at the end of Dark Phoenix, like, they all just kind of like end up on the train, and they're all like the same, except Charles. He like has like one monologue where he's like, oh, I messed up because I let it all go to my head. I'm like, that never paid out, so whatever. If it was gonna pay out, I feel like it should have gone to his head, and he should have done something, right? Like, I guess the implication is that because they went on that mission and the Phoenix Force captured Jean Grey, he put them in harm's way. But he doesn't see it that way.
Well, story-wise, I always thought it was interesting that both of these films essentially try to place the blame on Charles Xavier. Yeah. And again, I don't ever think it's truly successful. I think as an audience, you're watching it and you're like, okay, well, what he did, it's justifiable. It's not like, when when this is revealed to us as the audience, we're not like, wow, Charles, that was so inhuman of you. We can't believe you did this terrible thing. Kind of like almost what happens at the end of the Harry Potter franchise with Dumbledore, where we start finding out that he's a much different character than we were led to believe.
Yeah.
In fact, many ways we're like, well, Charles, we can see how you actually did this and it helped her. So I always thought that was a weird misdirect to try and, portray this character in a different light. They never go far enough to make us, the audience, truly question him or his intentions. And it just kind of is a mess.
Yeah. Like, there's elements. So, okay, Jean Grey's story, like, I don't know why both movies are dealing with like her childhood, like home or whatever. Mm-hmm. But honestly, like, I think like if you just lifted that whole like her going to her childhood home, if you just like lifted that out of there, I don't think it matters. And same thing, that whole storyline with her dad and Dark Phoenix, if you just like tossed it away, I don't think it changes the movie at all.
No, I agree. Probably would have made it better. I mean, let's not kid ourselves.
But maybe that's the problem with the movie, is like it can't settle on like where the actual villain is. Like they're kind of like, oh, it's Charles because he put all these blocks in Jean Grey's mind. You're like, no, it's the Phoenix Force that just wants something evil. And then, you know, she has like this internal guilt about like apparently having killed her mom or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, I focus it in on something and make it really powerful. And instead they have like all these competing things that I don't think they pay out all that well.
No, I would agree. I think another problem with the idea of the Phoenix, you know, the Dark Phoenix movie is it had been what, 14 years since The Last Stand came out. It seemed a little too soon to be almost rehashing that storyline again.
Yeah, and then I think the number one thing, and this is in relation to that comic book story, but neither movie really captures the epic scale that the Phoenix Force story should demand. It should be epic.
It's almost a trilogy of its own, and Fox never saw it that way. Same thing with the Apocalypse storyline. It should have just been, hey, you know.
Oh, it's like, you know, like for as epic as the Phoenix Force story is, I'm like, so it ends with you guys fighting on a train.
True.
Like, are you kidding me? Think about like, you want like scale and scope. And I mean, when you look at, you know, we have to at least compare it to the other side, which is the MCU. I mean, as they build to these like cosmic forces, it does get epic. The scale does grow.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't do that here. And again, I think it's to its detriment. It kind of sucks because you're like, I don't know. You know,
true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, this was supposed to be one of the craziest storylines in the comics, and yeah, they just end up fighting on a train. I was like, whatever. So, and then, you know, in Last Stand, the ending, you know, they're fighting on like, what is it? The Alcatraz Island or whatever. And I liked the scale, I suppose, that they were trying to go for, which was like, you know, he's like moving the bridge and like this is like altering like the city. But on a personal level, you know, they'd already kind of established the stakes that Wolverine was going to have to kill her.
Which plays into the fact that he's had feelings for her for the entire trilogy. I think that's a little more powerful.
Yeah, I think Hugh Jackman delivers a great performance because you can see that he does not want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he doesn't, but he does.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they end up winning the day, and, you know, the cure is, you know, essentially kind of abandoned. But I don't know how you could ever abandon it. That's like a Pandora's box thing. Like, if it's there, it's there.
Well, you bring up a good point, right? Like, if someone has learned, you know, it's the quandrum we have with nuclear weapons. We've already learned the knowledge, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, we can't undo it. Like,
we can get rid of them all, but we still know how to make them.
Yeah, we could still build them again. So it's kind of like, I don't know, whatever. But, you know, there's a hint at the end of that one that like maybe the cure isn't forever. Maybe it's something like what Charles takes to repress his powers in Days of Future Past, mm-hmm. that, mm-hmm. you know, they can be restored or whatever. So I don't know. And, you know, maybe like you said, it's like that vaccines. Maybe you got to go get booster shots.
Well, and you know, another interesting thing about Days of Future Past is the post-credit scene with Charles Xavier waking up. And I think this is another thing that for fans, we weren't sure where the trilogy was going, and it was seemingly abandoned.
Yeah.
With this really intriguing kind of cliffhanger of, is Charles back, right? He talks about the efficacy of, you know, one man, you know, someone's conscious inhabiting in another person's, which is obviously queuing us up for this discussion about Jean Grey and Phoenix Force. But at the end, right, he appears in someone else's body who's presumably brain dead. And
isn't in the comics, isn't that supposed to be like his brother or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I read about it one time. But anyway, that's another thing is Last Stand. It's playing both sides there, where it's implying, right? It's the last stand. It's the end. Like it's like Avengers Endgame. They call the movie Endgame, and then they're like, just kidding. There's like 3 more movies in the Infinity Saga. You're like, why is number 2 Endgame? That should be the last one.
Exactly.
So, you call it the last stand. I mean, to fans, you're definitely signaling that after this, the franchise is going in a different direction, however you decide to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know. To me, that was weird that they had the post-credits scene. I mean, as cool as it was like, but these characters aren't really coming back.
No, I mean, I agree with you. It was very odd. Very odd. And so, again, I think the single greatest problem in all the X-Men's films is Fox had access to this amazing property, and they never really seem to have a clear plan of how to use it and what to do with it. And it's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, most of the X-Men movies, minus I love X-Men 2, X-Men United. I like how they're exploring Wolverine's past. I thought the scene at Alkali Lake and the sacrifice by Jean Grey was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I like Days of Future Past. Its scope overall is great. I mean, they're altering timelines. They give fans a little bit of fan service, but really it's not just fan service. Like, it's for the characters as well, restoring the timeline that was lost for them. They're rescuing their friends, right? It's like Avengers Endgame being able to snap again, right? Yeah. They're bringing people back. So, I think one of the things that Fox really kind of effed up, and Dark Phoenix exemplifies this, is just scale and scope. They never saw the stories as these big, epic, multi-movie stories. Phoenix Force literally could have been introduced in one movie and plays out over a couple movies, and then you have like this epic showdown finale that could have been insane.
No, you're right. And how awesome would that have been? That's what we always wanted from the X-Men films, and we never got it.
Yeah, they don't see it that way. They see it as like a singular 2-hour movie, even though, I mean, the comics even made it like an entire storyline. Like, it wasn't just like one comic book issue storyline. It's like, it was epic. And I don't know, I think in a lot of the movies, or in a lot of the cases with X-Men, they just saw them as singular movies to their detriment.
You're absolutely right. Right. We have the original X-Men trilogy. We have a Wolverine, kind of trilogy that's a side story of its own. We have
which might be the best of all.
We have the new trilogy with 4 movies. We have this Deadpool offshoot that incorporates the X-Men but doesn't incorporate the X-Men. And then after Dark Phoenix, we had New Mutants, which was, again, another attempt to reboot the X-Men. And it's almost like, Fox, man, just commit to something and play it out. You have great characters. You have great stories. And as fans, like, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I went to see every one of those movies in the theater at least once.
Yeah, me too. I went to see X-Men 2, X-Men United, and Days of Future Past a couple of times.
Yeah, right. I'm like, we're going to show up. Just give us something to really deliver. And it's a shame because they always fell short on the story standpoint. Original cast is great. Secondary cast isn't bad. I mean, I don't really have any complaints. There's no one on the X-Men that I'm like, oh, wow, terrible, right?
I wasn't a fan of Jean Grey.
All right, fine. So you're hating on Jean Grey. But for the most part, I'm like, I don't really have an issue with the casting decisions they made. Just write some damn good, stories. Please.
Yeah, and one of the problems, if you look at just release dates, you said 2006 versus 2019, right? At least in 2006, The Last Stand benefited from not having this MCU in existence. So did everyone leave The Last Stand disappointed? Of course they did. I'm assuming most people were like, at best, this isn't the best in the X-Men trilogy. At worst, they were like, this is not a good movie. But it didn't have to compete in scope and scale with the MCU. The problem for Dark Phoenix is it released in 2019. That's the same year that Endgame came out, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, or did Endgame come out in 2019?
I don't know. The point is the game had changed.
Yeah, like Dark Phoenix, you're this is the finale to the X-Men, and you have to compete with Endgame. I was like, it feels like a
Last Stand benefited from being pre-Dark Knight and pre-Iron Man, and those were game changers, right? That was our hard reset on what to expect from comic book movies.
So, yeah, I think it benefited a little bit. I know, yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to pick here. Which one do I like more? I don't know. I might have to go with X-Men The Last Stand, I think.
Ooh, okay. All right.
Well, which one do you like?
Well,
or which one do you think did it better?
As I said, I cannot complain about the casting of the original X-Men. But for me, I spent up until Days of Future Past cursing The Last Stand with my every breath. So I cannot, in good conscience and as a principled individual, say I like The Last Stand more than Dark Phoenix. So I'm going Dark Phoenix. My non-personal justification is going to be, it was great to finally get what I think was a missing element of the X-Men series, which is let's really see X-Men push the limits of their powers. And we got some fun fight sequences out of it. And as a comic book fan,
I can't disagree.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. I will pick The Last Stand mostly just because it's the finale to the first two and it's a part of that trilogy. And I think for that reason, it just carries a little bit more weight for me.
Okay.
By the time we get to Dark Phoenix, I don't know. I didn't care a whole lot anymore. I mean, to the extent that, I keep talking about Days of Future Past, but the reintroduction of the original cast and figuring out the end of that. To me, I'm just going to call that the end of the X-Men. Because we got Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix after that. I'm like, no, that was like the end. That was the one.
Fair enough.
So I like the story of the original cast. And even though Last Stand is definitely far from a perfect comic book movie, that's going to be my pick.
All right. Well, Last Stand, Dark Phoenix. Audience, let us know what you think. Which one of us is right and which one of us is wrong?
It's me.
I would disagree, my friend.
Well, you kind of got me because you said which one of us is right. And then as I said it, you said which one of us is wrong. So I may have spoken too late, but
audience, let us know your thoughts. And if you just want to say you love the X-Men, we're cool with that too. And if you hate the X-Men, then just don't even bother reaching out to us on social because you're fucking dead to me. I don't care what you have to say.
Well, hey, do you think the MCU has any plans to integrate the X-Men anytime soon, or are we like years away from
No, I heard that they do, and I'm actually horrified because I wish that they would just keep the X-Men as their own universe. There's so many characters and storylines and so much potential there. I'm like, can we just have a decent X-Men universe? That's
what would be cool
for a little while?
Yeah, what would be cool is if they did that, but just like the comics, they have like a crossover event. Yeah, but instead of just integrating the X-Men into, MCU films at large, it's like, what if it had its own kind of like side universe and then eventually like not, because you know how like you could basically do the MCU, but with the X-Men if you wanted. There's enough characters and enough story that you could literally do it where you actually have like solo films. Then you could have like the X-Men team up like the Avengers. And then you could honestly do like 2 MCU style like story structures in a big crossover event would be pretty dope.
I don't know. Maybe they'll end up doing a House of M storyline and we'll get that.
It sounds like, I don't know what they're going to do.
So audience, let us know your thoughts. I'm at NDCal5. You can find D-Man at Big Kid D-Man. And
you can find the show. Go to Google, type in Filmmakers Compass Podcast. You'll find our website, links to all the social and all the podcast directories. So be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed the show. CP, take us out.
Next week, we are going to be back with something not as exciting as an X-Men movie. I'm sorry. We're going to be comparing the Footloose movie from the 80s, with the remake apparently from 2011 that I didn't even know existed. So we'll see what that's like. In the meantime, keep watching movies and we're going to see you next week.